Thank you very much, Kardikas, for very nice introductions. We are very pleased to present our book research here at George Washington University Central Asian Program here. I have not been here before, but I was once invited to be a guest researcher, but due to family obligations, I was not able to be a fellow here. But Sherzod was a fellow here for 2 months, I think. Yeah. It's really nice, nice atmosphere here. And today we would like to present our two books, one published by California University Press and another one by Palgrave. And today, instead of presenting in a standard mode, we would like to have a Sherzod conversation in the way we discuss this book in Istanbul or in Moscow while sitting in Uzbek cafes. I think that's how we would like to proceed, to have more Chayhana style gap. Yes, I think everything should have some historical background. So we would like to present the history, then move to the ideas leading to this book project. After finishing my PhD in 2013, I wanted to do something different from my PhD thesis. And at the time, Sherzod was based at Nagoya University in Japan doing his PhD. When I visited our home village in Fergana, 2013 was a time when Russian ruble was very strong, and almost everyone in our village was working in Moscow, because our village in Fergana was Moscow village in the sense that there was a chain migration to Moscow. And still I'm based in Sweden, and then in the eyes of the villagers, Sweden is richer than Russia. So they were thinking in terms of remittances. And then my father was telling me, why you are not sending more money than our neighbors? One based in Lund and one based in Tsukuba in Japan. So this is our starting point. And then when I started my fieldwork in Russia, before that, of course, like everyone else, I did a literature review. I studied about migrant legal adaptation practices and the literature which reflects the migrants' experience in the immigrant communities and Western style democracies. So I was equipped with understanding about, that migrant illegality is a kind of dead end and it puts migrants in a vulnerable position. So I was very much equipped with ideas about migrant undocumentedness and then the importance of having a legal status when migrants move to new country. But interestingly, when I came to Moscow in 2014, it was just coincided with the Russian invasion of Crimea. So then this hostility between the West and Russia started. And to me, when I visited Moscow for the first time, I expected more legal compliance and then the labor relations, but much to my surprise, I think migrants' life worlds were informal to the extent that all labor market relations, documentation, legalization strategies, strategies to gain even gaining legal status, it was so informal. Then the idea, the theoretical framework or understanding that I gained through reading the Western literature didn't fit the context of Moscow. It was 2014, and at the time, of course, there were Russian migration experience regime was under-researched also from many ways. Then this is how I started critically challenging the Western-centric understanding of migrants' legal adaptation, legal status, and then Russian experience didn't fit this broader debates about migrants' experiences, which we find in the Western countries of immigration. So this was a starting point. And then based on this, then I started exploring different studies focusing on migrants' socio-legal integration, adaptation experiences. And then based on the Russian experience, and I said that probably in weak rule of law context like Russia, where civil society is strong and where laws are applied arbitrarily and there is legal uncertainty, probably legal adaptation is not just about complying with the law, but it's also more about understanding the street law, bribery skills, negotiating the rules of the game with different informal actors. So this means it was, to me, based on my fieldwork experiences, studying migrants' experience in Moscow together with my classmates from the village networks, gave me ideas that this is adaptation in the context of Russia is more about adaptation to the street law, which means to informal context rather than to the state law. This is how this idea about this migration and hybrid political regimes, this book idea came out. Then I started developing this book idea, and then I submitted it to California University Press book proposal, and this is how I got the contract. And then, Sherzod, you can talk about how the Turkish dimension of this research was developed.
Yes, I think, Rustam already mentioned about how he came up to write the book idea, and then back in already 2017, even 16, we were already talking about discussing, though remotely, how the dynamics of the Russian migration regime. And after having finished my PhD when I was in Helsinki, and then which coincided with again, on the one hand, following the invasion of Crimea and then Western sanctions, Russian economy started, the ruble started to crumble, and also this also coincided with the implementation of draconian laws in Russia in terms of Russian immigration regime. We have seen these, different kinds of laws, including rubber apartments or 90 to 180 rules, which made Central Asian migrants' life quite difficult and hard in Russia. And this was the time also the Russian authorities in fight of and with the purpose of fighting irregular migration, they were just deporting Central Asian migrants from Russia from 3 to 5 to 10 years, and then a lot of, maybe in thousands, maybe tens of, or even hundreds of thousands had to go back to their home countries, and not being able to return to Russia, they were stuck in their home countries. And Kazakhstan, which is whose economy is still better, but you don't have enough work there, and then salaries are not as good as it would be in Russia. So at this time coincided also with a relative growth of the Turkish economy, and also the fact that the Central Asian citizens could visit Turkey without visa for up to 90 days, which also facilitated which also contributed to the sharp increase in the number of migrants from Central Asian countries, especially of Uzbek migrants. those who in a way, those who would not be able to visit Russia, I mean, they have an option to go to Russia, to go to Turkey. So, and then while working both in Turkey, when we were visiting Turkey, and then meeting a lot of Central Asian migrants in Turkey, mostly in Istanbul, we were talking. I mean, it coincided with the fact that, I mean, many of them have. It turned out many of them have worked in Russia before, and then we were asking. I mean, how do you like? I mean, which one do you like more, Russia or Turkey? I mean, our preconception, our understanding was that, I mean, Turkey as it's a Turkic-speaking country. I mean, religiously and linguistically quite close. And then, I mean, given that, I mean, many Central Asian workers, migrant workers, were complaining about chauvinism, xenophobia they were facing in Russia, we were thinking that, of course, I mean, Turkey must be quite better. But it turned out many people were saying, I mean, many of them kept saying, Türk'te iman var, insaf yok. Rus'ta iman yok, insaf var. Which, I mean, roughly can be translated as, while Turks have faith, I mean, in Islam, but they don't have this mercy or feeling of justice. With Russians, it's the other way around. They are non-faithful, I mean, non-faithful in Islam. But they have the feeling of justice. I mean, they have mercy, and then people are surprised. And how can this be true? How can Turkey, how can Russia be more better for Central Asian, for mostly Uzbek migrants than Turkey? And then this allowed us to further dig into this question.
Yes, and this, of course, these two experience, different experiences also served as for us point for comparison also. Then we again went back to international migration studies literature. And then we started with a critique of the mainstream migration studies literature, which still based on the study of migrants' experience and immigration policies in the context of Western liberal democracies in North America, Western Europe, and Australia. And then, according to International Migration Review, leading journal in migration studies, 80% of articles published in the journal since 2016 geographically focus on North America or Western Europe. So, which means limited attention is granted to migration dynamics beyond the West. And according to World Migration Report, in 12 of the top 20 destinations for international migrants consist of countries not belonging to traditional Western countries of North America, Western Europe, and Australia, which means major non-Western migration destinations like, let's say, Turkey, Russia, Gulf countries, migration process in Southeast Asia, or in North America, North Africa, or West Africa, these important regions, destinations for migrant workers, they remain outside the scope of these theoretical frameworks in migration studies. Of course, when we nowadays there is an increase in the literature focusing on non-Western migration regimes, locales. But when we worked on our book project, there was not much written about this non-Western migration hubs. And of course, when we also check the contemporary migration regime typologies, again, they focus on Western style democracies. And but we argue that frameworks developed in Western style democracies, they don't fit the context, like Russia or Turkey, where we don't have a strong rule of law, civil society is strong, and then the court decisions are arbitrary. For example, in Moscow, when I visited court cases, I did some court ethnography. Very often, immigration judges they used the standard text template, and sometimes they didn't even change the names of the migrant workers. So sometimes you could see 2-3 names in the court decision when it comes to these deportation orders. So it was a standard, decision. And then this means while we don't see this kind of practice in the West, of course, migrants have also problems, and they also face undocumented. But at least in the context of the West, there is a strong civil society, human rights, and then you can still challenge decisions of the migration board in courts, and there is a still system of independent courts, for example. But this is not the case in countries like Russia or Turkey. So this was also one of the starting points, points for comparison. And we argued that non-democratic and also non-Western immigrant receiving countries are often characterized by these autocratic regimes, pure human rights record, which means we cannot apply uniformly the experiences, the frameworks developed in the context of the West.
And also, yes. One thing, I mean, the literature, immigration governance literature says that in democracies, the governments, I mean, migration governance is mostly constrained by the national courts. I mean, this civil rights regime, international human rights regime, and then also this migration. The governments, they also dependent on public opinion in terms of public reception of people's local population reception to migration. While on the other hand, non-democracies or non-Western countries, they on the one hand, they, as Rustam has mentioned, migrants do not necessarily have, I mean, their rights are not always complied with, and also, but ironically also, the governments in those non-democracies, they are not dependent on public opinion. So if there is a xenophobia to receiving more immigrants, if government policies fits and see it fit that, I mean, they need more migrants, they don't depend on public opinion. So there was this the literature, the global literature mostly talks about this. What we think has been missing in there, also portraying migrants as just portraying migrants just agencyless, or just, I mean, it's not about migrants, but only about migration politics, how governments do politics in democracies or in non-Western countries. So and we wanted to move away from this perspective, because we wanted to contribute empirical insights into migrants agency, and how migrants can also participate in these power geometries, can also negotiate. And it's, on the one hand, I mean, there is this migration rules and laws and immigration
which are restrictive, repressive,
which can be restrictive and repressive. On the other hand, you have migrants who can, in this environment of poor human rights, corruption, informality, shadow economy, it seems migrants also have their own agency in terms of negotiating and renegotiating their this vulnerable and precarious situation in these non-democratic contexts.
Yeah, and as we argue in the book, for example, in this book, migrants use the opportunities provided by a weak rule of law and corrupt political system to navigate the repressive legal landscape and to negotiate using informal channels, access to employment and other opportunities that are hard to obtain through the official legal framework of the host country. So on the other hand, we have a restrictive system, but this restrictive system at the same time creates agency or empowers migrants to create alternative adaptation strategies. I always give this example. For example, if migrant is stopped by immigration official or police officer in Sweden, for example, if migrant is undocumented, it's highly unlikely that migrant will be able to get away by paying bribes. But this is not the case in Russia, for example, where I myself was part of this processes when migrants, I was walking in the street with migrants, and often Russian police officers stop them, and usually they don't have documents, registracja or patent, and often they say, commander, давайте договоримся. Let's make a deal. And then police officers, takes migrants to a corner where there is no much public, and then migrants are usually putting 1,000 ruble or 2,000 ruble depending on the situation, context, and giving, and a police officer smiles and lets migrants go away. Or even if migrant is arrested by police officer and sitting in the cell in the police station, it's another undocumented migrant visiting the police station and then paying the bribe and releasing. So police doesn't care if when you go there, if you have documents or not, but as long as you come with money and release them, then they are happy. So this is not possible. For example, in Sweden or in United States, you cannot bribe the police officers easily. And also, we have different anecdotes in our book. Very often, if you are caught by a police officer and if you have no any document proving your identity, usually you have to pay 3,000 rubles. But if you have at least fake registration, you get a discount. So you pay 1,000 rubles. But the police knows that it's a fake. So which means you can always, if you make a deal for 1,000 rubles, but if you have 2,000 rubles, police still gives you change. So you get it back. So there have been many cases, and during my field work, for example. So this is something that that serves as a point of comparison, and based on these daily empirical examples, observations, we made argument that in this both book project that we need a new lens. Adaptation in context like Russia or Turkey is not just about legal compliance. It's about also complying with informal norms and being a street smart and bribery skills. So this is what matters at the end of the day. Yeah.
Yes. Following continuing on this discussion, most of literature, especially, even absolute majority of those who are studying Western migrations, and those also in a significant share of those studying non-Western context also, they mostly seem to focus in their majority seem to focus on migration outputs, so-called migration outputs, which is, migration policies, laws, and regulations. How these, or in other words, using a socio-legal term, law and books. While we think the focus should be more on the migration outcomes. So not on migration outputs, but migration outcomes. What is this? It's, in opposition to law and books, policies, regulations, and laws, we wanted to focus on law in action. How does it work? What is going on the ground? What actually happens on the ground? So, you have in the Western context, you have rules, you have immigration procedures, and then they are mostly, in majority, they are just followed by local level authorities. But what happens in countries in non-democratic context, or in countries of non-democratic context, or where there is a high levels of corruption, as Rustam just mentioned, or shadow economy? What happens? You still have, if you look at Russian or Turkish immigration rules, they are also quite strict. They are quite restrictive. If you see, if you look at them, you see, there shouldn't be, or there should be quite a limited number of undocumented migrants. But in reality, it's mostly there are hundreds of thousands of undocumented migrants. And then this gives this is in contradiction to the laws. And then while it seems to us that in non-Western countries like Russia, Turkey, and many other non-Western countries, we should more look at migration outcomes. What happens on the ground, and what is the migrants' role? Do migrants have some kind of agency? How do they? It's not, and it's this constellation of actors. Migrants on one hand, who can be at the same time intermediaries, employers, government officials of, be it police or immigration officer or other government officials, how do they negotiate and renegotiate their relationships? So this, we thought this would be more important to understand how migration regime works in countries like Russia and Turkey.
Yeah, and to sum up, I think what this theoretical discussion in Western literature on migrants' experiences, undocumentedness, having undocumented status, illegal status, is seen as kind of dead end. So this is, and then this is exemplified by debates like liminal legality, legal non-existence, legal violence. In Russia, in Russian or Turkish context, being undocumented is not a dead end. It's a way of life for millions of migrants. And being undocumented does not deprive you of your agency, but you are becoming part of a general life out there. And this is because all migrants are pragmatic and they understand, especially in Russian context, that being legal is nearly impossible. Even if you get patent, but with one small violation of the administrative law, crossing this as a pedestrian, crossing the street when it's red line, or not having a proper registration or any other minor administrative violation, you again become undocumented. So this means it's nearly impossible to be legal in Russia. So migrants understand this, and instead of spending money on legalization strategies, which is expensive, migrants, they just resort to informality because they can easily find job in the informal sector. So that's one of the key conclusions stemming from our study. Mm-hmm. And having said that, we should emphasize that our data was collected before Russian invasion of Ukraine. Just I give you one example from my latest observations. My cousin, he left to Russia in 2010, and until 2023, he was undocumented. But despite his status, he worked in a warehouse in different places. And every time when he was caught by police or immigration officials, he was able to get away by paying bribe. But he was recently deported to Fergana, to Uzbekistan, because he was caught again by Russian police. But this time he was asked to choose between two options. First option is to choose to be deported to Uzbekistan. Second option is to go to war in Ukraine and to get paid 200,000 rubles. So he had these two options. So then he chose the first option. Then they deported him to Uzbekistan. But there are many other migrants. I know from stories they accepted the second option, and then some of the migrants, the bodies returned to our village in Fergana. They get one. I think it's a migrant who died in Ukraine. He got paid 200,000 rubles, and he sent 1,100 rubles to his family in the village, and then he kept another 100,000 just for his expenses during the war. Then, but he was shot during one of the operations there. So this is in the light of what's happening in Russia, I think our empirical data needs to be revisited. Of course, we cannot get access to Russia, but we are planning to interview returned migrants about the latest change in Russia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are smoothly moving to methodology. As our last visit to Russia, to Moscow, was in just before the pandemic hit the world. November 2019, and then we were planning another fieldwork in Moscow in March, and then what happened, and then we have war which is going on for the 1.5 years, so we were not able to visit or follow up on what's going on in Russia. And also in terms of what comes to Turkey, a lot has changed since we published the book in Russia. It's a dynamic field. On the one hand, the Turkish economy has has suffered quite, and which made the Turkish lira, when you convert it to rubles, not very much feasible for many migrants. And this is one thing. And then another thing is also the migration rhetoric has also changed a little bit, transformed in Turkish Turkish discourse also. We have seen Turkish president's elections and then pre-election discussions, and this quite anti-migrant xenophobia and anti-migrant sentiments in the public have also influenced how the police has been now quite. The police has been catching a lot of migrants, undocumented migrants, and deporting them back to their countries in Central Asia. But still, I think this doesn't change much of what we have written in the book. We believe, it's most of the things are still valid. Most of the arguments we have made are valid in both contemporary Russia and Turkey when it comes to the migration regimes of these countries. We should mention that to those in the audience, online audience also, both books. Those who are not aware, both books are freely available for download. If they
open access,
they are open access, and if Karlagash, maybe you could yes, share the links to them. People can just have a look, and then if they have quick questions, and we will try to respond to them. Book structure. The first chapter is about the introduction, how all these we have discussed the rationale aims of the book, and then we have also addressed theoretical how we theoretically conceptualize our book, and then in the following section we comparatively analyze how Russian and Turkish migration regimes have developed over the last 30 years. We have also looked a little bit to the overview, briefly the history, the historical events and factors that have shaped the current migration regime in these countries. And we have also shown that Russian and Turkish immigration policies, they have produced these unintended consequences. Namely, significant gap between migration policies or migration outputs and their actual implementation on the ground. This brought us to the need to consider these peculiarities when comparing Turkish and Russian migration regimes manifested in the workings of state officials responsible for migration management. Do you want to go on, or do you want me to continue?
Yes, chapter 3, we focus on migrants' internal life or social networks, because this is what shapes migrants' experience. This is one of the key arenas. For example, one important difference between Russia and Turkey. In Russia, there is a chain migration, in the sense that there is direct connection between village and migrant labor market in Moscow. And as a result, this informal labor market in Moscow functions based on the village norms, reciprocity, trust, and social norms. And as a result, if migrants are not paid for their work, and then the middleman originating from the same village has a responsibility to take care for the needs of the migrant workers, or in case of non-payment of salaries, retaliation usually takes place in the village. So this is a chain migration which serves as an enforcement mechanism in Moscow's labor market, centered around these village networks. But this is not the case in Istanbul, despite the fact that Turkish police officers are less corrupt. There is little xenophobia in Turkey. And also despite the fact that there is a separate Uzbek enclave in Istanbul's Fatih district. The Uzbek migrants call it Kumkapı, Uzbek Mahalla. So there is, they live in a densely populated area, migrants, but given the fact that this Istanbul's labor market, Uzbek migrants' labor market, is not organized around village networks, there is a very weak enforcement mechanism, and many Uzbek migrants suffer from exploitative intermediaries and employers because there is no enforcement mechanism in case they cannot get their salary. So we show how in these two migration regimes, so migrants' adaptation to labor market and their daily experience shaped, and the importance of having this kinship and social networks. So this is a chapter, and you.
Yeah, I think maybe as I see, we are running out of time. Very briefly, also speaking of maybe differences. One of the differences, I mean, you just mentioned about this settlement patterns of migrants in Moscow and Istanbul. Whereas in Moscow, you don't have you don't have one or a particular heavily migrant populated areas. Of course, there are these, Cherkizon or other small districts where you have, the share of migrants are quite, they are more represented, but it's not, you don't see places like Kumkapı in Moscow. It's another maybe the difference is that while Russian Central Asian migrants in Russia, they are mostly male dominated representing the structure of the need for cheap labor in Russian economy. It's mostly construction, transportation now. Due to these legislative changes, we are seeing less and less people working in transportation, but this cleaning service, which mostly require cheap male job. Whereas in Turkey, it's mostly female-dominated labor market due to the Turkish economy's need for, on the one hand, these works in the jobs in shops as sales assistants, or these small textile factories scattered across
domestic work, also
mostly, yes. Most importantly, domestic work and care.
Also
working in households.
Entertainment industry also is hotel tourism also.
Yes. This Horeca sector is also mostly dominated. At least in the lower hierarchy of job market, mostly require female jobs. So it's like, if we briefly say it's Turkey, most men go to Russia while most women go to Turkey. This is a stereotype.
This is also reflected the composition of our interviews. In Moscow, we interviewed mainly male migrants, while in Istanbul, our large proportion of interviews were female migrants from Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan.
Yes, and in the book we have also provided extended life histories of Uzbek migrants, two female and one male, how they have navigated this shadow economy, how they have navigated through street laws. Mostly bypassing government rules, and all of these. Why we chose these three characters? Because they have worked both in Russia, different cities of Russia, and different places in Turkey too. So through their life histories, we try to show how immigration laws have affected their life trajectories, and then how they navigated through these precarious conditions and situations. Yes. So this is mostly, very briefly about the books, and if
I think it will not be possible to present all the empirical data we have, and that's why we invite you to read both books, I think, and then you find rich ethnographic data about migrants' experience in Russia and Turkey.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So we start our questions who would like to ask? We have questions online, and we can first start with in person. Yeah, in person. You can introduce yourself and ask your question.
Yeah. So the other one of the white collar GW. Thank you, Sherzod, for the very interesting discussion. So was it only interview in Moscow and Istanbul, or was there country side so villages for the interview, and the difference between the big cities and the villages, the situation? So once we talk about the social rules, social rules. So maybe it's not in the cities, big cities. Maybe it's more at the villages. They rule there, like by local authorities mostly, yes. And the second question is about, you said about the street law, like bribes and trying to do it non-legal way in Moscow. So what about the Istanbul? Do they use this system also, migrants, to pass this non-governmental rules, regulations? Thank you.
I can answer first one, then you
Okay.
can take the second
Okay.
one. I think about we conducted interviews in Moscow and Istanbul, and also we did a transnational ethnography in the sense that we also interviewed migrants in their home village also when they returned. So, but you know, the migration dynamics in Uzbekistan, usually the migration is from rural areas to cities in Moscow. You don't find many migrants, you know, from Tashkent working in Moscow or Istanbul. It's usually that we have this big rural migration outflow. So that's why I think we mainly covered rural areas of Uzbekistan, not the cities. So that's answer to your question. So we studied this rural to urban migration dynamics.
Yeah, urban from Uzbekistan, but
Rural from Uzbekistan, urban in urban context in Russia and Turkey.
Well, yeah, we have mostly covered. Our field works mostly have taken place in Moscow and Podmoskovia and Istanbul.
Yes.
We haven't been to. I mean, although we have been to some parts of the country, but our focus ethnographic fieldwork took place in Moscow and Istanbul.
Is there a difference between Moscow and Podmoskovia?
Not much difference, because I mean it's still, I mean, it's still one big urban area. In terms of street law, yes, I mean in Istanbul, it's first thing that came that was stark difference was that you don't see much police presence in Istanbul. I mean, you see presence. It's a security-driven country. I mean, because of these geopolitical developments in the country, but they are not mostly looking for migrants. At least, I mean, back in 2019, 20, 21, they were not just looking for migrants and then asking, I mean, your IDs, please, as they regularly do in Russia. But when it comes to, I mean, when and if migrants are caught in Istanbul, it's usually, they say it's a quick, it's a fast, very quick conversation. They can let you go, because when they find out where you are from, I mean, especially earlier times. I mean, they say now our currently our informants are saying that it's getting difficult, more and more difficult. But I mean, 2-3 years ago, they were saying when they find out that you are Uzbek or Kyrgyz, or that you are from this Turkestan or Orta Asia, the most Turkish police were quite, I mean, nice to them, and then would let them go. They were more harsh on either Afghan or mostly Syrian and Syrians.
Yeah.
But it's not that you can easily bribe or offer bribe to Turkish police. Although we have heard cases that, I mean, there are some incidents of where you can ask, but not without openly paying money, which is a big difference.
And also, very often, you know, when migrants were caught by police, our informants usually worked for restaurants or for some businesses, and then they usually called their employers when they were caught by police. And then their employees talked on the phone with the police officers, and then Turkish police officer released them, because police officers, they usually got dolia share from Turkish employers, or in case of restaurants, they were able to eat free meal and then enjoy there. Until recently, I had the case of Akmal from Samarkand. He didn't have any documents, but when he was caught, he usually called his employers, and then police officer let him go. So this is how this informality works. Still, in both contexts, migrants are undocumented, but there are different ways to navigate the legal system.
So maybe now, okay, yeah, Marat and then Sebastian, and then an online question.
Thank you very much for sharing your Marat Adaptation, I would like to give some clarifications of a couple of terms that caught my attention. So, it's street law. Do you include anything else into this concept besides the bribery? Like what else includes?
Yes.
And you also mentioned justice. So, like in terms of migrants, considered Russia as a just country on opposite to the Turkey, right? So if you can a little bit elaborate on that, would be great. And the question is, if you know how Russia legalize illegal migrants when they subscribe them into this war in Ukraine.
Yes, thank you. It's a very good question. First question. The reason we use street law is not just because of the bribery, but it's also connected to the to Russian criminal subculture, понятие. And very often sectors of the Russian migrant labor market were controlled by Chechens, Dagestanis, and also there was a direct connection to Palazhenits and Vori, who were sitting in prison, for example. So in order to navigate the system, for example, we have one empirical example, a case study of Misha and other migrants when they were not paid their salary. Usually it's possible to contact Chechen разборщики, Palazhenцы, and then you offer 20% of the salary, and then they are fixing your problem and you are getting paid. So they provide this fee-based services also. And of course, then the street law dominates this relationship, because when you are contacting Chechen, you should follow the rules of this понятие and masculinity. You should not report anything to police. And then when you are telling the story to Chechen, for example, if you are a victim, you should not fabricate the story. You should tell what actually happened. If you are lying, then you will be punished by Chechens, for example. So this is I think this is what led me to my current research about Muslims in Russian prisons, for example. So this is that's why it's not accidental that we use street law. It's just on the one hand you have police officer, but we have also big migrants use the term köçe. Street means yes. So that's answer to your question about second one.
Well, maybe briefly in addition to what Rustam just said about, we also have life histories of I mean, for example, two girls who were both in prostitution and drug dealing, not only in Moscow but also in different parts of Turkey. So they had to navigate this criminal world, which necessitated us to use the street law. Beyond this, government official versus public, citizen bribing. Their relations. It's more than these relationships. In terms of this, justice, faith connotation, and we were asking why would you say that, and then they were. Most of their answers. I will just generalize here. Most of their answers were. In Turkey, you have very hard working conditions, and then working hours are quite long, and then you work in not necessarily protected areas. By European standards, you would not be allowed to work. While in Russia, it's also probably a legacy of this socialist system where you have where laborers, employees have more rights. In terms of the number of hours you work, in terms of the work protection you get. But of course, I mean, with migrant workers, it's not all of these work, but in general, I mean, in comparison to Turkish working conditions, still labor conditions working conditions were much more better in Russia. And also in terms of employers cheating employees in Russia, as we have heard, when migrants were not able to recover their salaries, I mean, those people cheating, as they were saying, were mostly migrant intermediaries themselves. I mean, in some cases, it's just fellow Uzbeks, Kyrgyz, or Tajiks, or other migrants with Russian citizenship, or I mean, non-ethnic Russians, let's say. I mean, Armenians, Azerbaijanis, who are acting as middlemen or subcontractors between the Russian employer and these migrant employees. While in Turkey, I mean, if this thing happens, I mean, non-payment of salaries, I mean, it's mostly the Turkish employers. So this led them to think of Russia being more just, more merciful when it comes to working relationships.
And also they often use the term Orus Aldameda, Orus Insafli. So Russians don't cheat, or they have mercy, while they use the term Sharafsız in relation to Turkish employers, because they usually exploited and migrants worked many hours and they didn't get overtime pay. While in Moscow, if they worked hard, or even if they worked hard, they still get payment proportionate to their long working hours. So, I mean, this Insaf and Iman comparisons were mostly related to their experiences in the labor market.
Thank you. Yes.
Here there was the third question about Russian invasion.
Legalization in Ukraine, if you know.
I mean, as Rustam earlier mentioned, we don't have direct access to. I mean, all we know is also, I mean, we talk to our informants, and then what we see, I mean, what is going on online. I mean, I can speak for example, how the governments in Central Asia, especially, I mean, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, they are discouraging their citizens to be mercenaries in a foreign country's military army. But it seems, you know what's going on with, I mean, Basrikin, Russia's general prosecutor, and other high-level officials are, I mean, urging, saying it again and again that, I mean, new Russian citizens or former migrants, they are obliged to serve, and they must be the first ones to show their gratitude to Russia, who have provided them with citizenship. And what it comes.
They have announcement at metros, yes.
I mean, it's all everywhere, yes.
Calling to go and to serve.
Get Russian citizenship, get paid.
They have announcement. I don't know.
Yeah. On the one hand, yes, they have this quite quickly expedited Russian citizenship acquisition process. On the other hand, I mean, there is a pressure on those who have recently acquired their Russian citizenship. I mean, there was a case quite a couple of days ago. They went to this Juma namaz, I mean, Friday prayer mosque, and then they took all the migrants. Those who didn't have Russian citizenship, they were let go, and those migrants or those Central Asians who had the Russian citizenship, they were taken to a military facility. I mean, whether they will serve further or not, that's another question. But I mean, that's what's going on Russia, as we know it from the media. Again, I mean, we don't have the direct access to the field.
And as our MFA, they announced that it is prohibited to serve at the military in Russia, and so they they say not to join them. And because of the law on the citizenship of Uzbekistan, it doesn't allow to serve at the military of the other country.
Thank you. Can we get to the questions online, please? So, sorry. So several people online asked if you only talk to Uzbek migrants but I think you mentioned that you interviewed mostly male Uzbek migrants in Russia, but then mostly female and migrants from other countries.
I also interviewed during my fieldwork Kyrgyz migrants also. One of my informants, Uzbek, he was married to Uzbek Kyrgyz woman. So through him, I got access to also community of Kyrgyz migrants also.
Yeah, I think it's
yeah.
just that several people were highlighting that there are different migrants, and like migrants from Turkmenistan have different consequences.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably we should mention that although the book name says, I mean, it's Central Asian migrants, but we have in the methodological section and in the book itself, we have clarified that we are mostly discussing the experiences of Uzbek migrants. I mean, although we have when we have other migrants, I mean, non-Uzbek migrants, Kyrgyz or Tajik migrants or Turkmen migrants experiences, we have clearly mentioning it. It's this, but overall, mostly Uzbek migrants.
And another question related to that you mentioned that in Russia there are better labor conditions than in Turkey, but could it be related to the fact that it's mostly male that you talk to in Russia? Because we remember like 17 Kyrgyz women who died in a sweatshop like a couple of years ago because they were working in inhumane conditions. Could it be related to that in Turkey?
Not, I would say not necessarily, because I am not. I mean, we are not
sexual harassment.
We are not.
Female migrants faced in Istanbul.
Yes, we are not saying that. I mean, Russian working conditions in Russia are better. I mean, they are better than in Turkey. It doesn't mean they are good. They are still bad. Also,
we should give the example of this. For example, sorry for interrupting.
Yes, go ahead.
When we interviewed Uzbek migrants in Istanbul, they previously, many of them worked in Russia. They complained a lot about sexual harassment.
Of Turkish,
when Turkish employers hire them, they usually make one condition that I'll give you a job, but at the same time you will become my sevgila, which means mistress. So this and then many Uzbek women, they had to accept this condition, or if they don't accept, they don't get a job. And then Uzbek women also at the same time made comparison to Russia, where Russian men were not interested in them. So they didn't have less sexual harassment experience in Moscow, while in Turkey they faced sexual harassment on a daily basis.
Yeah, and also, I mean, there is one factor we should also take into account, that most of these interviews, I mean, later interviews took place in Istanbul, I mean, in Turkish. I think, I mean, you have this also human psychology when it comes to memorize things, and then you want to memorize, I mean, good things about the old, and then while working in these bad working conditions, probably most migrants who were saying, I mean, Russia was better, it was better to work in Russia, probably they were mostly memorizing good things, which may not necessarily affect the reality. I mean, reflect the reality. I mean, this could also be one of the factors that we should take into account.
Thank you. Sebastian.
Thank you. Sebastian Pirous, the director of Research Program here. I was wondering if you could say a few words or elaborate a little bit on the role of migrant associations in Russia and Turkey, and to what extent they are helping migrants to navigate between this formality and informality. And a second question, which is still related to these migrant associations, I was wondering also to what extent these associations are free. I mean, some of them we know that they're pretty controlled by the government, and it's a Central Asian governments. I've seen that, well, in a different case, actually, for instance, in the case of Tajikistan, you know, where you have some associations which are supposed to help students in Russia, which are supposed to help them in their daily life in Russia, which are actually totally gone-goes, you know, used by the Tajik governments to control the students there. So my question is, do we have an idea on how Central Asian governments are actually trying to control these migrant associations, or if in your research, in your work, you had any chance to work on that?
During fieldwork in Moscow, we interviewed several migrant rights organizations, associations. One of them was a trade union of labor migrants in Russia, and this trade union was led by the Tajik migrant activists. And when we interviewed them, they were not happy with the rate of membership in this association, because usually migrant workers, they usually carry their legal baggage to Russia. In home countries, back in Uzbekistan, for example, there is no strong interest in trade unions. We have no this trade union culture, and very often migrants didn't show strong interest in these associations, trade unions. So the interest was very low. We also interviewed migrants, also migrant rights NGOs also, and very often this, for example, association of Uzbek diaspora, for example, which was led by this guy Ibrahim Khudayberdiev, was involved actually in exploitation. And then there were also some associations that collected dolia from migrants in order to support ZEX, the prisoners serving sentence like a grave. So this is, this is one of the examples. But of course, there were some migrant rights NGOs like Tong Jahon, led by Valentina Chupik, or Migrant Info by Botar John Sher Muhammad. I think they provided very good legal advice and served, defended them in courts also. So migrants had mixed feelings. When we did the same work in Istanbul, we visited migrant rights NGOs, but unfortunately, there were not many migrant rights NGOs focusing on Central Asian migrants. They usually received funding from European Union to work with Syrian and Afghan refugees, but not much in relation to Central Asian migrants. But recently, one NGO sponsored by Uzbek government started working. It's called Uzbek Kadın Hakları Derneği, which means Uzbek
Women Rights Center,
and they usually provided shelter, temporary protection to those Uzbek female migrants who face sexual harassment or exploitation. So Uzbek government is trying to do something in Istanbul to support female migrants. Maybe you would like to comment?
Maybe a little bit of, as I understand your question, I mean, in Turkey, also maybe partly in Russia too, in terms of, I mean, approaching migrants and talking, making them talk to us, I mean, share their stories with us. That, I mean, there was this feeling of, at least at an initial stage, migrants were not sure who we are. I mean, representing scholars or government officials. I mean, disguised as scholars, and especially in, if you remember, Rustam, in Kumkapı, some religious people were quite not very sure, at least at an initial stage. I mean, it wasn't easy to establish trusting relationship between some of them, partly because they were afraid of this government persecution or surveillance, and because I think other than the CIS countries, Uzbekistan, Turkey is the only country that Uzbekistan and Turkey, they share this information of people who would, I mean, they have this quite close cooperation in terms of how do we call this? I mean, justice or I forgot the term, but it's mostly related to Uzbekistan's concerns about these potential religious extremists who were using Istanbul as a hub to move to Syria. It was mostly back in, I mean, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, but also in recent years too. So, and I mean, we haven't come across much with migrants' rights associations in Istanbul that would particularly focusing on Uzbek migrants, other than the one he has just mentioned.
Thank you. I'm Ryan. Visiting scholar. I'm also visiting, but not a scholar. Just for a few days, happen to be in DC. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting. And I missed the last couple of minutes, so in case I'm asking a relevant story. But the first comment was, okay, I think it's great that you juxtapose the Russia, Turkey to the Western context and the literature. So that's where you find the gap, right? So these regimes are not discussed. But to me, even more interesting seems to be comparison of Turkey and Russia, and varieties of non-democratic regimes. and the last word that the way how you are saying that they find Russia more appealing for this than this reasons, be it personal attitude, employer to employee, the way how police reacts. So if we classify both Turkey and Russia as typical non-democratic states where rule of law is weak, but then it's amazing to see the cultural dimension of the way how it gets expressed through the eyes of migrants. And maybe, I don't know whether it's in the book or whether you have a plan, but I think if you throw away its West thing, because it's a bit boring now already, because obviously the audience is for the English speaking, so I think it's right that you are saying this, but even more interesting might be in the future how can we explain how lack of rule of law plays out so differently in personal experiences of Central Asian migrants. Maybe it's about history, Soviet Union, and the way how we understand Russians better than Turks. Turks are still new brothers for us after 1991. Before that, okay, we have religion, we have something of language, but overall it's a bit different type of background. We have Russians versus Turks. Maybe it's some other aspect. Maybe it's about Turkish state versus Russian state, how the whole communist legacy of the Russian state, maybe that's where, as you mentioned, the labor relies and so on. That would be just interesting, I think, in the future. But my question is more about this Central Asian migrants having agency and co-shaping the practices in Russia. I wonder, for Central Asia, obviously, for all of us who are in Central Asia, from Central Asia, these things don't really surprise, right? So the way how they negotiate with police, because that's what we do with Gaishniki in Tashkent and Bishkek. That's how we deal with tax inspectors in Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan and so that's our familiar context. So in Russia, there's nothing surprising. And that leads to the question of whether migrants actually prefer this lack of strict laws, just like in the US or in Sweden, and thrive in the environment like Russia, or still is it kind of suboptimal for migrants? They wish things were black and white, there's a law, and then there's so that they work. That's, I think, an interesting question, whether it's inevitable, that they have no chance, so they're forced to navigate and learn and practice and co-participate with police, with driving and so on. Would they prefer, in the interview, did it come, would they prefer UK, Sweden, and US rather than Russia?
I think this is a very good question, and this came out a lot, these questions that you raised during our interviews. About first question, you are right, we targeted mainly the Western literature audience, and juxtaposing Western and non-Western migration regimes. So this was our main audience. So we targeted this this book not as area studies piece, but more as a migration studies scholarship. So this was our target to reach broader audience. So this is, but you're right that this has also big relevance to area studies. And recently, I think today, I think we got email that our chapter, which is part of this Road to Central Asian Words, edited by Madeleine Reeves, and it's out now. And in this book, in this edited volume, we have a chapter together with Sherzod, and we call this chapter Informality and Uzbek Migrant Networks in Russia and Turkey. Actually, here we are actually comparing Russian and Turkish migration regimes through this area studies, through comparative approach, and we are not juxtaposing it to the Western debate. So we have already working on that. But you are right, there is more to compare here. So we can also focus on historical, cultural dynamics. So this could be, as you rightly suggested, future avenue of research for us. So we could write more on this, reflecting. And the second one is about having this weak rule of law, is if it's preferred option or not. Many migrants, had mixed feelings about this. Some migrants we interviewed, they said that it's good that we can pay bribes to Russian police, otherwise we would not be able to stay here. So they prefer to have this informal status. And some migrants, they were more legalistic, and they said that we would like to have proper legal status, but it's a Russian legislation which is unpredictable and uncertain, which do not allow us to work legally here. So this means there is a need, I think, to get this general picture. There is a need to do a large-scale survey, but this is what we find in our data.
Yeah. Maybe to complement this, I mean, I ran a research project in Sweden that studies Central Asian migrant workers in the Nordic countries. I mean, mostly in Sweden. And then, I mean, one of my informants quite recently, and I remember this quite vividly. He has worked in St. Petersburg for 9 years, and then he's been in Sweden. Then by last year already 4 or 5 years, and then he was saying, I mean, in Russia it was quite good, and then why would you say that? I'm asking this. I mean, all this, but you know, this he was not able to recover his salary from a Swedish-Finnish employer in Stockholm, and then well, of course, I mean, consequently he was able to do this through trade union. But I mean, at the time, I mean, he was in the frustration that I could already do this with the help of I don't know, Chechens or somehow I would find a way to do this. But there is this big element of when comparing Russia or Turkey or any other country, I think for what matters for migrants most is the salary, how much you get. I mean, people are ready to work. I mean, in Russia, Russian salaries are much higher, at least used to be higher. I mean, 5, 6, 7 years ago or 10 years ago, even before that, it was quite high compared to Turkish, for example. That was also one of the factors that they would choose. And if you ask, for example, an Uzbek migrant or Kyrgyz migrant, would you work in a lawless society in Russia where you would get $2,000, or in a law-abiding society of Sweden where you would get $1,000? I think the preference would be for the country where you get more salary, because it's the most one of the most defining factors of choosing your destination.
And Mahabo, and then.
Yeah, I have a quick question. It's regarding you talked about the comparison between villages of Turkey and the big city, Istanbul. Have you given attention on when you mostly did in Moscow, right? Your research.
In Moscow and Podmoskovia.
Did you get a chance, or are you planning to compare the big cities of other Russian to see how they're our migrants? Because we know that it's not only in Moscow, but many migrants in other cities also. Are you planning, or do you see that it's there is a different, could be different, because what you're saying, it's a lot of interesting stuff. But I'm just curious, in other cities, what is going on there regarding the street law, or I don't know, these associations, or all of this together?
I think there's, of course, if situation changes, political situation in Russia changes, we would like to do follow-up field work in Russia. And regarding the difference between Moscow and other Russian cities, there is already research showing that experience of migrants in Moscow and other Russian cities might differ, especially in relation to police corruption and the labor market adaptation. So there is a difference. So this is already shown in the existing literature. So our data reflects megapolises like Moscow or St. Petersburg. So there might be a difference.
Maybe this is also, we can use also this as a chance to announce about the project, a EU-funded project that in Lund we have secured.
We got nearly 2 million euros from European Commission to test this non-Western migration regimes ideas.
And it's not only Russia or Turkey.
In nearly all continents, we are covering Latin America, West Africa, North Africa, Southeast Asia, Middle East, East Asia, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, Balkan. So we have now a global project. We are launching it in February. So we will study our idea globally in different continents.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Monica, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm really excited about your new project too. So will that include, because over the past 2 years, 50,000 Uzbeks have come into the United States, and most of them have worked in Russia before. And so I'm wondering if that will be incorporated into your project, and to look at that to see what they say, where they have this, their networks are different here, the way they find jobs, the way they, where they decide to live and things like that.
So we are not covering Western Europe, North America, and Australia. We are covering mostly non-Western contexts.
Oh, that's fine.
But we are mostly, I mean, we will be mostly at least cooperating, or maybe also incorporating, inviting scholars who would also, I mean, work work with Central Asian migrants. I mean, because in a way, I mean, North America being a Western country, I mean, that's understandable. But also we have on the one hand, I mean, sending society being coming from the non-West. I mean, on an individual, as part of the project, I think it would be interesting to look. But the project itself, I mean, overall looks at the non-Western context.
Yeah, but we have enough funding in the project to finance extra.
Yeah, I mean, those research areas also. And then we are also very much, I mean, on an individual level, I would myself be very interested in studying what is going on with Uzbek migrants or Central Asian migrants in the United States. I mean, it's I mean, coming to America has become dream number one. Or I mean, how popular America is in Uzbekistan also, and how much people are ready to pay, or how much effort they are ready to sacrifice to come to the States.
And also these transit points like in Mexico and Nicaragua could be a part of the project, because this is also non-West context, as we phrase it.
Well, they all go through Turkey first.
Yeah, Turkey is being the first hot. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, where you find further your ways. I mean, we've seen apartments in Turkey, in Istanbul, and then it's like temporary. It's like a hostel. Some people come in, some people get out, and then those people, I mean, you can see a lot of, I mean, like a dozen people, 6 of them are applying for EU visas, and then some of them are for US visas, and then lucky ones are leaving, and then it's being filled by another new applicants, and then there is a big network of facilitators or intermediaries who are operating these channels. And I think Turkey is being the most important.
Yeah, we rented mattress space in this kind of apartments for $15 a day, and we just lived and stayed observed, and then every day we met new migrants there.
It's a hub.
Yeah.
In
Istanbul is
Kumkap,
a hub.
Aksaray, there are many apartments, you know, for temporary stays.
Thank you. We have several more questions online. So one of them is from Aikiru Motikeva, who is asking, can you please elaborate on the retaliation that middlemen could face in case of non-payment of salaries? You said that the retaliation could happen back in the village. How does this happen? Like the family of the middleman is shamed, ostracized, and
This comes in the
why the middlemen are responsible.
I think this comes in chapter 3. We have excellent case study. It's a chapter 3, Uzbek migrant workers in Russia case study. And this is a case study of Misha and his brigada. And they share, they come from same village, and Misha fails to pay their salary. And what happens? First, migrants use Chechen racketeers to recover their salary. But Misha, due to his 20 years of experience in Moscow, he uses Russian police officers against Chechens, and migrant gets away. And according to street law, when Chechens cannot recover your salary, so then you cannot make any claim to middlemen, because according to street law, Misha won the battle. And then, but migrants didn't stop. And then after the street law mechanism was exhausted, they used village pressure. First, parents of the migrant workers, Misha had around 15 migrants. They came to Misha's house in the street, in the mahalla, and they made a scandal in the mahalla, showing, and then his son exploited and didn't pay, and he's not good Muslim, eating haram food. So this is what happened first. And also the mahalla had also a mosque. In the mosque also they informed the imam, and during Friday prayers also imam mentioned this case. So this, and then Misha, of course, he won the street law battle, and according to street law morals, he was not obliged to pay their salary. But Misha had to face the village pressure because even though he was physically in Moscow, his parents were back in the village. So not being able to face the village pressure, Misha eventually,
they were not invited.
yeah, also Misha's parents were also not invited to weddings, or when they were invited, people sitting in nearby tables, they made sarcastic remarks about. So Misha, eventually he had to prioritize the good of his family over the money. So then Misha paid their salary. And so I have this case study. Read the chapter 3 of this book. So you have a very, detailed, sick description of this, village level retaliation.
Thank you. The next question is from Marianne Lanatsen, from your colleague from Lund University. So she says, thank you very much for interesting presentations. How has the number of immigrants from Central Asia developed? And how many are there now? Well, I guess it's you've already kind of commented on
yeah, I think the numbers, I mean,
it was 2.2, I think.
Officially, at least 2.2 million Uzbek migrants are in Russia. I think about 600,000, these are again official figures, we don't know the reality. About 600,000 Kyrgyz migrants in Russia, about 1.1 million Tajik migrants in Russia. When it comes to Turkey, we don't know really. I mean, no one gives you this figure, because also due to the fact of we have a lot of shuttle migrants also who are coming back and forth, while at the same time, I mean, if there is a job opportunity working in there, so there is this, I mean, they are easily changing between changing their roles of migrants or shuttle traders. But if you look at the figures of remittances, I think about, I mean, while from Russia to Uzbekistan, $6.6 billion were sent. I'm not aware of the latest figures, which can be manipulated, which can be also due to the fact of this rubles changing value to in relation to the US dollars. But I mean, it's this big. While from Turkey, I think about to Uzbekistan last year, $300 million were sent. Given taking into account that many shuttle traders, I mean, there is this also hawala system that, I mean, you don't have to take out the money to buy goods in Istanbul, and then you just, I mean, it's the relatives, it's the people, acquaintances that, I mean, the money is kept in Turkey, and then relatives get the money back in Uzbekistan or Kyrgyzstan. But even only using through these official channels of remittances, I mean, 300 million, it indicates, I mean, the presence of a lot of...
They're also often sending cargo, the garment products instead of money, because it generates more money. And also they are sending money in cash through the shuttle traders, because every day when you take a flight from Istanbul to Tashkent, I think many of you, there are so many, the bazarche women, taking lots of, and then you don't have even place to put your luggage or hand luggage there, because it's fully booked, used by them. So every day is 10 flights at least to different, and they are all full with the shuttle traders.
I think at least 100,000 Uzbeks are present in Turkey. So, I mean, but this is not, again, I mean, we don't know the reality. It's, and it seems also the largest number of Turkmens also live in Turkey, while I mean the biggest number of other Central Asians, Uzbeks, Kyrgyz, Tajik, they live in Russia.
Thank you. The next question is from Aruzhan Dostay. She works at the Kazakhstani think tank Paper Lab, and they are currently doing a research on exploring the effects of the war in Ukraine on migration in the Central Asian region. Do you think that the ongoing war is leading to a diversification of the destinations for Central Asian migrants, like maybe they choose Turkey? What kind of changes can we expect in migration flows?
I think if I can go, it's when Russia started invasion of Ukraine, and when West imposed sanctions on Russia, we were all under the expectation, or we all predicted that Russian economy would collapse and Central Asian migrants would return to their home countries. This was a prediction, and we know that instead, situation Russian ruble became stronger, and instead the number of migrants working in Russia increased, even significantly, I think.
I would say it all depends how long the war will go on.
Yeah.
I mean, how long the Russian economy can withstand the Western sanctions. I mean, we have definitely seen it's not only the ruble's currency rate, but also this pressure of being drafted to Russian military. It's also one of the factors that migrants or foreign migrants, current Russian citizens, they have to take into account. And then we have seen also why Uzbekistan, I think, is one of the top three countries who are trying to whose citizens are trying to get into the US. I mean, through these illegal ways. I think 13,000 only. I mean, detected. We don't know how many in reality. How many have gone through? I mean, these airports, used airports to enter the states. And then by the fact that as we are also studying migration in the Nordic countries, the increasing number of Uzbeks and Central Asians are present now in Russia. But I think this is a chance for Central Asian countries or sending societies of Central Asia to diversify the export of their labor force. But Russia in the coming years, I think, will remain one of the most important countries of the largest importing country.
In the light of the inflation of Turkish lira, Turkey
Turkish
is no
economy
longer
is not doing good.
Yes, so Russia Kazakhstan also probably receiving more than before now.
Thank you. So now I would like to ask a question from myself. So we know about like hundreds of thousands of Russian people going out of Russia to all the bordering countries. So what is the difference between, like, we call them relicants, but Central Asian are
we don't call them relicants.
Labor migrants. So, yeah, could you maybe talk about this? Is there a real difference?
We were right in Tashkent when Putin announced mobilization, and then we couldn't find any hotel in Tashkent, because all hotels were fully booked by Russians.
Yes.
and there were mixed feelings. Some called them deserters.
Yeah, who came up with the relicants then?
Russians themselves.
Russians themselves.
Well, I mean, we are not in the capacity. There are many researchers, I mean, really studying, this topic. I mean, all we could say would be, I mean, speculation. I mean, just observations. I mean, I'm, for example, I'm not in the capacity to, I mean, academically respond to that question. But as a citizen, as someone who's been studying migration and in general, there is this. We don't have many in Central Asia, right? And then many of them have chosen either Turkey or Georgia, Armenia, and those who have stayed. I mean, not all of them. Those who went to Central Asian countries immediately, not all of them have stayed. Some of them, I mean, a significant share of them, I would say, also have left. But it has, I mean, those who have decided to stay, I think they have contributed to spikes in apartment rents, and then which have again raised some concerns in the country. I mean, relicants or from their perspective, it seems that they are bringing in highly skilled, high skills that are not that is scarce in Central Asian countries. But again, I mean, these are all speculations and
IT skills,
including one.
IT skills and
Russian culture also.
And the robbery from the cards, bank cards, after the Russians came to Uzbekistan, because they began. So yes, the new ways, Russian ways.
Do we have any more questions? I think there are no more questions online, but everybody's thankful. Oh, there's one question. What about the return of migrants from Central Asia? I don't know.
Return of migrants from
Russia to Central Asia, or
I guess
from
question
Russia to
means,
Central Asia.
how people are returning to their home countries. I don't know if you can.
Yeah, I think when the war started last year, we have seen in March a flow of migrants returning to Russia, and it seems many people who can find ways to go to Europe or America, they are trying to do so in other countries. But I mean, it's more than 2 million people. I mean, there is not much. Yeah, I don't think there is much. There is much return. There will be much return in the immediate.
Instead, they are going more and more to Russia, at least in the Fergana context. I know there is increase now.
Because Uzbekistan is suffering because of the war between Russia and Ukraine, as to say it in the context that the economy, so the prices of rice, the price for the rent, it doubled.
It's probably true for all the countries surrounding Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we will be wrapping up our discussion. Thank you so much. This was very interesting, and all the people online are very thankful, and they got a lot of good and interesting information. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you for hosting
very much.
us.
Thank you.